Welcome to Gear Acquisition Syndrome. Today we're looking at the Fujifilm X-T3 with the 16 to 55mm f2.8 and the 50 to 140mm f2.8 lens. This wouldn't be a very good video if I didn't film it with the X-T3, so let's switch these out. Okay. Alright, this is the Eterna film simulation. This is F-Log. Now this is F-Log with the Eterna LUT provided by Fujifilm. And now this is that graded. What do you think? I don't know. I'm just gonna go back to Eterna and let the camera do all the work. This review comes after using this camera in my video production workflow for a couple of weeks. This isn't a walkthrough of every single setting or every single option this camera offers. I don't have the time to make that video, and you wouldn't have the patience to watch it. And though I will refer to my experience using the GH5 for the past couple of years, this isn't going to be an exact side-by-side comparison of the two. And by the way, I'm using the eye tracking for this entire video with the X-T3. I've used the X-T3 to film all of my B-roll and as a second angle in the last few videos published on my channel to learn a little bit about the camera. I've also alternated between the Eterna film simulation and F-Log, forcing myself to explore the menus and kind of learn how the colors work with this camera in post. I also did a ton of research and joined multiple social media groups for the Fujifilm X-T3 to kind of help speed up my learning curve. Learning to make my videos look the way I wanted them to look with my GH5 took months. I feel like I did pretty good with the X-T3 in just about 2.5 weeks and only as a part-time YouTuber, but I know I still have a little bit of way to go, and that's just overall as a professional. I'm not a colorist. I'm not the best at color grading. That's one of the reasons I like the Eterna film simulation. The learning curve on the X-T3 system is a lot smoother than what I went through when I was testing out the Sony a6400, because the menus on Sony were just kind of a nightmare. The X-T3 is weather sealed and it has 2 SD card slots. It also has a USB-C port that will e-charge it with external battery banks. It also has headphone and mic jacks, but the mic jack is TRS only, meaning if you use a DD VMic D3 Pro, you'll need to use a different cable than what it comes with, because the X-T3 mic jack does not support TRRS. The menu for selecting bit rates, frame rates, and codecs is amazingly intuitive. It can do 4K 60p 10-bit 420 internally at 200 megabits per second. It'll do 4K 30 frames per second internally at 400 megabits per second, 10-bit in H.265 and 8-bit in H.264. An HDMI out will give you 4K 60p 10-bit 422. The GH5 doesn't even do that. F-Log comes built in as an option. Vlog didn't come with the GH5. They sell it for an extra $100 for some reason. It'll do 1080p in slow motion at 120 frames per second at 200 megabits. So the slow motion looks great out of the X-T3. The shutter speed dial for me stays locked at the T setting, and then I use the front wheel to move it down to 48 because I shoot in 24 frames per second. I like that it has 48 and 50 as separate options, so you can choose 1/48 to hit your 180-degree shutter angle rule at 24 frames per second, or 1/50 if you don't care about that or you're shooting in 25 frames per second. Fujifilm provides LUTs for free for their F-Log footage to make it match what the Eterna film simulation should look like, so you can maintain the dynamic range latitude of F-Log while still getting the beautiful colors out of the Eterna film simulation without having to sacrifice anything, if you have time to grade. If you want the colors of Eterna without having to grade, but you still want a little bit more dynamic range, the X-T3 has a setting to bake in better dynamic range automatically, and I did a video explaining that already. It's their dynamic range setting. There's a link to that video in the description of this one if you want to learn a little bit about it. I'm currently shooting at 400% dynamic range with the X-T3 on Eterna, and only 100 megabits per second. The autofocus is phase detect, and I'm using it right now with eye detection, and in my experience, it's just as good as Sony's. If I had to sum it up in a few words, the X-T3 feels like a GH5, but with a larger sensor, amazing autofocus, but no flip-out screen or in-body image stabilization. There's only a mini HDMI out port on the X-T3, which seems kind of strange considering the huge 4K 60p 10-bit 422 output this camera offers, but I guess that's not a big deal. Interestingly, it is an ASPC sensor, but it has a smaller crop factor than other ASPC sensor cameras. The crop factor on this camera is only 1.53, while most other ASPC sensor cameras I've played with have a 1.6 crop factor. So it means this camera is ever so slightly closer to the full frame equivalence with your wide angle lenses. So your wide angle lenses will be slightly wider than if you were to have the same focal length on another ASPC camera. The lack of a fully articulating screen is pretty baffling considering what they implemented on the X-T3, which is much more complicated. That shouldn't stop you from being able to vlog with it though. The autofocus and eye tracking is stellar due to a very recent firmware update they just came out with. It is a lightweight camera, even with a monster lens like the 16-55 f2.8 that I'm using right now. The 16-55 gives it a nice hand-holdable weight and grip, so if you're tucking your fingers between the lens and the camera body, you're able to hold it without fudging any buttons or the touchscreen on the back if you don't have a SwitchPod or GorillaPod or anything else to hold your camera with. It can fly very easily on the Ronin S, which is what I've been using it with for all my B-roll. It's easier to use on a gimbal than my GH5 was, mainly because the autofocus works really well and you're able to depend on it. I got the Ronin S originally to use with my GH5, but the autofocus was so terrible I just let it sit in the closet and collect dust. Since I've started playing with the Fujifilm X-T3, I've used the gimbal on almost all of my B-roll shots, and it saves me a ton of time, especially when I pair it with these little quick release plates that I picked up off of eBay. They're like 10 bucks a pop, and I put them on all the mounting points. Look, I mean, I use them on everything, but here's an example. Boom. Locked on. So if you balance your X-T3 with the Ronin S and you put a quick release plate on there, taking it on or off is just 1 second, and then you turn your gimbal on and you're good to go. Everyone knows the GH5 has in-body image stabilization, probably the best in the game for a camera body, but that's still nowhere near what a real gimbal is capable of, which is why I got it in the first place. In 120p, the autofocus still works great on the X-T3, so for an instantly super smooth B-roll shot, I just throw it onto the gimbal, drop it into 120 frames per second, done. Gigabytes of footage saved, several minutes of filming and editing also saved. It's like a B-roll time saver. Enabling the touchscreen when you first get the camera is a little confusing, and I thought that it should have been enabled by default. I thought maybe my camera had like a busted touchscreen or something until I did some research on how to enable it. I mean, it's not really a problem. Once you find the setting, you change it, and then you never have to deal with it again. The menu system is super intuitive and has a lot of crazy options that I never would have even thought about. You can even configure the tally lights in the front and the rear of the camera so you know when you're recording. The preamps are fantastic, and the interface for configuring audio is pretty great too. The accessory door is removable, which is nice, and it's something I haven't seen before. And Fuji lenses are amazing. The ones I've been playing with have an aperture dial that feels classy and modern, yet still retro, kind of like the ISO, shutter, and EV compensation dials. Of course, the aperture can be set to auto if you don't feel like dealing with manual clicky settings. Fujifilm X lenses focus ring also doesn't have hard stops, it spins forever. But in the settings, you can change the focus from clockwise to counterclockwise and from nonlinear to linear, so it will work with the follow focus system should you ever feel the need to use manual focus. If I had to pick one lens, it would be the 16-55 f2.8. It's a great focal range for filming what I usually do, and it focuses at macro-like focusing distances. Somehow, the way they designed this lens allows for light stars when lights are pointing directly at your camera, even at really fast shutter speeds and wide apertures. Like, I think you could probably even see it here. Yep, it's little, but you can see it. I used the 50-140 briefly, and I was super impressed with it on a sturdy tripod, but in the end, that focal range is just a little too far for me and my workflow working in my studio. And switching lenses takes time, so mainly I just use the 16-55mm. And Fujifilm seems to offer some of the biggest firmware upgrades I've ever seen out of a camera manufacturer, so I can appreciate that as soon as I started reviewing this camera, they came out with a firmware update. My take is if you're looking for a new camera, the X-T3 is an incredible option and an incredible value for roughly the same price as the holy trinity of the GH5, the Sigma 18-35 and a speed booster. You can get the X-T3 with the 16-55mm f2.8 lens, which is a camera system that is 2 years newer than the GH5. If you're on a smaller budget, you can get it with the 18-55mm kit lens with image stabilization, which the community seems to love for a total of only $1,700, though I haven't played with that lens yet. The body alone costs $1,400 if you just wanted to pick up your own lens. This camera was provided to me by Fujifilm, and I wasn't paid or compensated in any way to review it. I actually have to pack this camera up and send it back now, unfortunately. But I am already working on getting my own X-T3 into this studio in the next couple weeks so I can answer some more of the questions that you guys have been asking me on my last few videos. And I want to make a true side-by-side comparison of it between the GH5. I also want to compare how the image looks from all the different film simulations at all the different bit rates and so forth. So stay subscribed because I'll be back. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.